Iowa State's a weird team this year. Just defensively, I think is where they're struggling a little bit, at least in Big 12 play. They've not been as good. Gave up 41 points to Texas Tech last week, but offensively, they're about as good as they've been in the past. Brock Purdy is 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Brees Hall and still having a great season, 1,200 yards rushing this season. So Oklahoma's going to have a big challenge, and even before this season, Mark, Iowa State has played Oklahoma tougher than really any other team in the conference, and I don't expect that to be any different. Iowa State is really back to with the 4 losses, they're back to a spoiler role. I mean, I don't know that there's a path that they could even make the possibly, but I don't think there's a big path for them to make the playoffs. Make the Big 12 championship, especially with the head-to-head loss to Baylor. So it's really Oklahoma State, and I think Baylor at this point in terms of the conference race. So yeah, I think it's a wake-up call. I mean, obviously, I think you can tell kids from time and time again, but if they still keep winning, I think it's a different situation. But now you're coming off of a loss and know that you absolutely have to get this game. It'll Like I said, it'll be I anticipate a very hard fought game. Tall receivers in terms of Charlie Kolar, really big from a tight end perspective, and Xavier Hutchinson in Oklahoma. Covered in the back. They did. Secondary play was better, I think, against Baylor. But the run defense wasn't as strong as they needed it to be. So I think you're looking at another close game that's going to come down to the wire. Even with Iowa State losing as many games as they have this year, their 4 losses, most of them have been close. I mean, Texas Tech was a 3-point loss. They lost by 7 to West Virginia. They lost by 2 to Baylor, and then they lost by 10 to Iowa. So all of those games are within 10 points. So I think it'll be another game that'll go into the fourth quarter, and probably the biggest key for Oklahoma, especially on the offensive side of the ball, is find a way to get some kind of a running game going. I think Texas Tech ran for around 200 yards against Iowa State, so there's opportunity there. They just have to be able to take advantage of that and play, honestly, their best game of the season to be able to win.
Some comments coming in through the live chat concerning the comparison of the LSU and Oklahoma programs. One particular viewer, Marshall, does not think that LSU can compare to Oklahoma as a job. It's a debatable topic. There's no doubt about that. Yes, Oklahoma has won more consistently than LSU. LSU did win a national championship just 2 years ago. They do have to fight through a more difficult conference. And then you have to just look at not just the history and the recent history and the winning percentage and championships, but as you mentioned, LSU just seems to be one of those few schools that will do anything within their power to win in football. Not that Oklahoma's not at that point either, but as you stated earlier, it does seem to be common thought that LSU would break the bank and pay whatever was required for a coach.
Oh, absolutely. I think whether it's Jimbo Fisher or whether it's Lincoln Riley, I think that they will attempt to make either one of those guys the highest paid coach in college football. I don't see Jimbo taking this job. I mean, honestly, I think I would say there's probably a less chance that Jimbo takes it than Lincoln takes it, to be honest with you. But I think those are probably the two big fish guys that they would go after. Dave Aranda is very interesting. I don't know if LSU feels like he's big enough yet for them. But seeing what he's been able to do with Baylor in just 2 years has been a pretty dramatic turnaround. I thought that, when we were previewing the Big 12, I thought that they would be better. Obviously, not quite this good, but he's um, he's a proven commodity on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that's very, very clear everywhere he's been, and then it's obviously been no different. Last year they were still pretty good defensively. They didn't get blown out, and but so I think, but having a full off season has seen him. Come to the forefront. So I think he's going to be. I think Aranda's going to be a factor at some point, maybe next year, in some job, whether it be an LSU, whether it be a USC, or whether it be somewhere, with some of the dominoes that fall with other coaching changes, that could happen. So, yeah, no, they're just watching. I think where a lot of the love comes from, with kind of specifically from Oklahoma fans, because there's been a lot of positive conversation about Aranda from an Oklahoma perspective. I think where this comes from is, I think Oklahoma saw a very natural progression with Alex Grinch in the last couple of years. 2 years ago they were, in the 80s or 90s total defense wise, but they were much better than they were the previous year. Last year made just a tremendous jump into the top 20, top 30. And looking at it, I think most people expected Oklahoma to have probably a top 15, top 20 defense, and it's been anything but. It's been, kind of a massive disappointment on the defensive side of the ball based on what Oklahoma's expectations were coming into the season. So, I mean, I think that'll be interesting. There's a lot of talk that Alex Grinch may not be back one way or the other. Not that he'll get fired, but he'll just find somewhere else to go. But I think, that will be, does the and that's an interesting discussion here, that we've never really had, but his mentality from a defensive perspective on faster, quicker, leaner defensive linemen and just across the board, is that something that works at the Power 5 level? I mean, I know I know he was very successful with the scheme at Washington State, and granted, yes, Washington State still at the Power 5 level, but is it a scheme that can work for big time college football? Because you don't see that type of lineman at Georgia. You don't see that type of lineman at Ohio State. You don't see that type of lineman at Alabama. So, um, it was an experiment, and I'm not completely saying that it didn't work, but I think it's something that in the off season that clearly will probably be evaluated in one way or the other.
You check out the Pac-12, and I'll try to refrain from being too harsh on the Pac-12 because I beat that conference up this year, but they've deserved it outside of one game pretty much. Yeah, and the Pac-12 is producing NFL players, so there's obviously a level of quality there, of course. But if you turn on a Washington State, Oregon State game and just look at the athletes on the field, it looks different than watching Ohio State and Penn State play, or Georgia and Tennessee play, or even a mid-level Big Ten or SEC game. It's just, they're just different dudes on the field.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that speaks to what you're talking about right there.
Yeah, I mean, and no, you're right, and I think this year's where the kind of the rubber met the road, just in terms of that. And like, can't argue with the success that he's had over the first couple of years. So you kind of, I mean, you kind of trust the process, to maybe not necessarily from a blind faith perspective, but you still trust that process. And now you are in a situation where your talent level has been much higher than it's been in the past, and you're still in a position where, across the board, Oklahoma has not been as good in any facet, defensively. So yeah, I mean, I think that's something that is up for evaluation after the end of the year, on, is this the right approach that we have that we need to have going forward. And I think one of the, and again, this is room. Don't know if this is true, but I think there's from within the program, there's been some, there's been some concern that Lincoln Riley's not allowing Grinch to practice really the way that he wants to practice. It kind of in the same mode of the softness he wants. Grinch wants very, very tough, hard, physical practices, and Riley has kind of shied away from that a little bit, just kind of protecting from injuries and things like that. So I don't know, how much of that's true, but it's something that I've kind of consistently heard here locally, over the course of the year. So again, I don't, behind closed doors, we don't know, what's happening, but it seems like there's a decent amount of really kind of questioning the the future and the what the trajectory of this program looks like right now.